So I'm going to ask you to think of a time when you crossed over a border or some boundary or some threshold or overcame some social stigma or something. Sometime in your life when you either physically, emotionally, or spiritually crossed over some boundary or border. Those are learning experiences, right? Generally, they're challenging, but that's where we learn so much about ourselves and about others. When we're willing to cross over and understand life from a different side. One example was when I was a seminarian. In my second year of seminary, I took a course in hospital ministry, and part of that course, I would go to Washington Hospital Center each week, and I would be given a list of patients to visit on a particular ward. I didn't know anything else about these patients. They could be any religion. They weren't necessarily Catholic, or they could be no religion at all. And the expectation was that I would pray with the person and converse, but not just kind of light conversation. My job was to help this person more fully embrace their spiritual and emotional journey as they were going through whatever physical treatment they were getting in the hospital. So it wasn't just light conversation. And then when I went back to class, I would have to present a report on how I ministered to the people on my ward that day. CPE, if anybody is, that's what it's called, clinical pastoral education. So I dreaded it. I absolutely dreaded it. Not because I don't like people, I like people a lot. But I never knew what was going to happen when I crossed the threshold of that hospital room. I'm the type of person who likes to feel competent in what I do. I feel very uncomfortable when I don't feel competent, when I'm not in control, right? And walking into a hospital room and being able to delve into some pretty heavy topics with people was not a situation where I felt very much in control. I mean, just to give you one example, I remember one time I went to see a teenager, and I think he was a gang member, but he was treated for stab wounds. And I thought I had like the perfect question. I said, you know, being so close to death, do you think it has changed your life? And he said, I don't care if I live or die. And then I was like, frozen. Where do you go from there? Right? So I only dreaded it because I just didn't feel like I was doing my job. Here I was, you know, a man of God. I was supposed to come in and bring the good news of Jesus, right? And make things right for people. And I couldn't do that. But through training and prayer and experience, I came to realize where real healing takes place. When you just listen with compassion and stop trying to control the situation. Because the more I tried to control the situation, the less healing took place. The more I let go and allowed that person to speak whatever he or she needed to say in that moment and you know, bare their souls, that's where healing took place. Not only for that person, the patient, but for me as well. So I find that that's where a lot of healing takes place. When we can give up our need to control and just listen. So we're in week 4 of a preaching series on Mark My Word. We're in the Gospel of Mark, and we're looking into the miracles of Jesus. Last week we learned in the gospel that Jesus has control over the forces of nature when he calmed the wind and the sea while he and the apostles were in the boat, right? So this week we have two more miracles that tell us that Jesus also has power over sickness and death. And as we look into these scripture readings, I think we're going to learn a little bit more about how that healing takes place and what we can learn about healing in our own lives. So let's delve into the scripture passage. And we have Jesus, this is when he goes to see the young girl, and he says, "Arise, get up," right? This is the end of the story, but what comes before it is, of course, Jairus coming to Jesus and begging him, right, to heal his daughter. And of course, then Jesus is going to go off, right? Of course, he has the power to heal from afar, but no, he wants to go and see the girl. He wants to go to the person's house. And so he's on the way. And while he's on the way, he encounters a woman who touches the hem of his garment in a crowd. And she's healed of her hemorrhage. And then, of course, he goes on to Jairus' house. All right, so what we have is two healing miracles. One is right in the middle of the other. So we have bookends, another miracle right in between. And that's done very specifically because the two miracles teach us something. They support each other. And there's so much similarity between them. What they're doing is they are reinforcing the message that Jesus wants to get across to us. And we're going to look at how that does that. But that's a literary technique that's used in Scripture, where you put one miracle story in the middle of another miracle story. Scripture scholars have a very technical term for this literary device. Do you know what it's called? A sandwich, right? It's called a sandwich, right? So let's look at the similarities, but let's first look at one of the differences between the two stories, because that says a lot to us as well. One difference is, in the case of Jairus, he's begging Jesus on behalf of his daughter. That's the desperation of a parent. And in the case of the woman, she's asking for healing for herself. So sometimes we are asking for healing for ourselves. Sometimes we're asking for healing for others. And that is something we're going to do this evening as well. Because as Father Mike mentioned last week, at the end of my message today, you're going to have the opportunity to write what your healing petitions are, whether they be for you or for someone you know. But that's the power of prayer, either for ourselves or on behalf of others. So that's one of the differences between the two healing miracles. But there's so many similarities. I'll only go into a few of them, but they are informative. And one, as I said, is that they are both desperate. The woman has exhausted all of her resources in trying to find healing, and it's only gotten worse. She's desperate. She goes to Jesus. Jairus, who's a synagogue official, is really desperate on behalf of his daughter. He goes to Jesus. And I think that speaks to us because, faith isn't perfect. We may think that we have perfect faith or want to have perfect faith, but a lot of times we're crying out to Jesus, not from our perfect faith, but from our desperation. And what this story tells us, that's okay. That's okay. The other thing is the number 12. Isn't that interesting? How long did the woman have the hemorrhage? 12 years. How old is the girl? 12 years. What does 12 mean in sacred scripture? It means governance, order, and wholeness. Numbers mean different things in Scripture. 40 means many. When you hear the number 40 in Scripture, it doesn't necessarily mean the number 40. It means many, right? 3 is perfection. So 3 days in the belly of a big fish, 3 days in the tomb, perfection. This is 12. It means order and governance and wholeness. And so what do these two healing stories connect us to? The cosmos, right? It's not just about these two women. It's about Jesus restoring wholeness and order, right? So there are how many apostles? And there are how many tribes of Israel? 12. Yes, that's where order and wholeness, right, comes from. The other thing is it's not just a restoration to life and wellness, it's a restoration of relationships, and that's key. The woman is restored to her relationship with the community. Why? Because as a woman with a blood disease or a hemorrhage, she would have been an outcast because people with blood problems were considered impure, and they could not fully participate in the life of the community. Through the healing, she's restored to relationship with the community. The girl is restored to relationship with her family. Exactly. But here's the kicker. What else is similar about the two healing miracles is that there are so many boundaries or borders or social stigmas that are being crossed. Kind of like that story I told you about me in the hospital. For healing to take place, quite often we have to be willing to cross uncomfortable borders and boundaries. So what are all of them? And there's so many of them in this story. One is Jairus. He's a synagogue official. He's desperate. He goes to Jesus. The last time we have an encounter between Jesus and synagogue officials, what do they want to do with him? Kill him. So Jairus is a member of a group that despises Jesus, but now he has to go and beg to Jesus. That's crossing the border of humble pie, right? And humility. The woman touching Jesus, a woman touching a strange man in public, completely taboo and inappropriate, especially since she is impure according to the social stigma. Right? A couple barriers that are crossed. So there are many more, but just for the sake of time, I think you got the point. For real healing to take place, sometimes we have to be willing to cross those stigmas or those boundaries or those borders and enter into the life of the other. Jesus wanted to know who the woman was. Jesus wanted to go to the house of the little girl. I had to learn that lesson to cross from my own anxiety into the life of the other person in order to be a good minister. So what does that say to us? Sometimes we have to give up our desire to control situations and just listen. Cross that barrier. Enter into the life, the world of the other person. And that is not always easy. Sometimes it's really tough, especially when it comes to, emotional and spiritual and physical healing. Too often, I think, and I'll admit to this, I look for the easy answers, the things that are going to make me comfortable, not the person who's suffering. So it might take the form of, somebody who lost a family member to death. And we use cliches like, oh, he's in a better place, right? Or God chose to take one of the good ones to himself. Those are things to make us feel better, not the other person. Or even a worst case scenario where, somebody loses a child. Oh, you're young, you can have another. People say that. Or if somebody's experienced a breakup, a romantic breakup of some kind or another, and you say, oh, there are plenty more fish in the sea. Those are all ways of kind of dismissing the person and dealing with our own anxiety about the situation. But healing doesn't take place there. Maybe rather we should say, tell me about what's heavy in your heart right now as you're going through this. Let me hold your hand and just take a few deep breaths with you. How's that feeling? What is it you'd like to say? Open-ended questions are dangerous because you can't control the answer. But that's where the healing takes place. So maybe that's something we can think about in our relationships with others. How can we, right, ask God for the courage to be able to cross those barriers sometimes, not build more of them with cliches or other convenient ways of wanting to fix other people, but be able to just enter into other people's world and listen with compassion. And that takes faith. It takes a lot of faith. It takes the faith to know that the healing power of Jesus can work through you, but probably not if you're trying too hard to control the situation. Much more so when you live with the mystery, have a little courage, cross over the barrier and say, just talk to me. Tell me what's going on. What's going on in your mind? What's going on in your heart? And then we have the faith to realize that that's where a lot of healing takes place. So as I said, we're going to have a chance to show our faith and ask God to heal, or offer petitions for ourselves or for anybody else. There's slips of paper at the end of the pews, and I think some pencils as well. So if those of you who are at ends of pews can make sure that everybody in your pew has a piece of paper and a slip of paper and a pencil. And don't put your name on it. What we're going to do is collect them and put them in this bowl here, and they're going to be offered up to God in the petitions of the Mass. And as you see me lifting up the bread and the wine as an offering up to God in the Eucharist tonight, see also all those prayers that you offer up to yourself, for yourself and for others, that we're going to lift those up to God and ask God to give us the faith to be healing instruments in this world.